Hey, what's up? Welcome back, everybody. Today we're building a custom drum kit from scratch. Instead of loading a fully assembled kit from the library, I'm gonna just pick a couple of one-shot samples and season them to my own taste. This is a great way to improve sound design skills and come up with something very unique. When designing drum kits, I always find that having an interesting loop in the background always helps to get me going. So I reached out to this new soulful HAZY DAYS Expansion and this time loaded a full demo project. With just a couple of tweaks, I was able to flip it into something seriously different. But before we get into this, let's check out the original track first. It's this 92 BPM, very laid back hip-hop groove. What? Riding in my 6.4. And then there's these children chanting, which come in the car section, and I love that loop, and I wanted to flip it so hard. So let me show you what I did. First, I was focusing on this melody played with the Bump Crush preset from Massive. It turns out that it's a pattern consisting of eighth notes repeating over and over again, and I wanted to bring them into a more triplet feel. So first, turning down the tempo to a 60 BPM, then selecting all the notes and changing the grid to eighth triplets in the step menu allowed me to bring it into a triplet groove by the push of a button. Check this out. And now only some of the notes have been moved and we are right away in a triplet feel. If I start counting in my head, it goes like 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 ha da da ha da da ha ha da da ha, and I'm right in that pocket. So let's bring on the electric piano. From the original demo track, and they fit perfectly. It's 4 notes, really wavy, with a little bit of vibrato on the electric piano coming from a sampler instrument. The preset is called Key Dawn. So let's bring in some more signature sounds, like these children chanting choirs. La, 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 la. Ooh, haunting. And they're gone somewhere. I got some more vocals from the Heads Up kit in the HAZY DAYS Expansion. I isolated a vocal sample called Vocals 85 D minor Heads Up. And by putting it into gate mode, I was able to create almost like a scratch-like pattern. Let me bring this on. And yeah, here in the GUI you can see it over there. I'm tapping the pads a couple of times and it's almost like a DJ with the crossfader letting some of the vocals through. And I put a delay on top, so we have this nice delay tail that glues it together with the rest of the sounds. And there's some sound effect samples for the turnaround of the loop. And that's, to be honest, all I need. I'm vibing and I'm looking forward to put a triplet beat on top of this now. Earlier I mentioned that I want to only work with blank samples today. So I reached out to the Young Phantom expansion and picked 3 samples that fit each other really nicely. It's the kick A Paper Stacks 1, 808 style kick drum sample, the snare crawler, and the closed hi-hat endings number 4. All 3 of them fit each other really nicely. And I just activated the note repeat button here, which is gonna help me to design a triplet heavy beat right away. I made sure to pin it by holding down the note repeat button and pressing button number 1. It's gonna stay lit even if you let go of the note repeat button. If you bring it to 16th triplets and hold down a hi-hat, you can already feel that it's all triplets now. And it's also quantized, so if I play any kick drum or snare drum, it's gonna be perfectly in sync with the hi-hat. Check this out. The pattern that I just created is gonna help me listening to all the drums in context, and this makes designing a drum kit way easier. Now, I'm gonna mute the kick drum first. And one thing that I actually noted earlier is that I need to bring down the polyphony to 1. Which means that the kick drum will cut itself with every trigger. It's gonna re-trigger itself and you won't hear these overlapping tails that currently sound a little grim. So let's bring down the polyphony to 1 and... perfect. We have these clean 808 tails that cut off when the new 808 is coming in. So the polyphony is something which you have to keep in mind when working with 808 kicks in general. And a little pro tip, if you decide that polyphony 1 is your preferred settings for every sampler in Maschine, you can save this as a default. Simply go into the software, right-click the sampler instance here and go down to save as default. So it's gonna open up a preset window here and it says sampler. If I save it now, whenever I load a sample in Maschine, it's gonna be automatically on polyphony 1 and it's gonna cut each other off. So when working with 808s, it's also important that the root note of the kick drum follows whatever is going on in the song. The bass of the 808 is replacing a traditional bass line. You remember this from my Young Phantom drill tutorial that I did a couple of months ago. So let's bring in the rest of the loop. Oh, and here we go. I hear a chord change in the instrumental, but the 808 is not adapting to it. So let's stop it for a second and take a look at the bass kick pattern. And yeah, here I'm basically gonna transpose all the notes in bar number 2 and bar number 4 down by a couple of semitones. So I'm just gonna select those with the mouse, because it allows me to create these very complex multi-selections here. So I have all the notes from bar number 2 and number 4. And with a key combo on Maschine, I'm gonna bring these down by a couple of semitones so they match the actual chord change from the song. 1, 2, 3, 4. And here we go. The low 808 follows whatever is going on in the instrumental. But I still feel that this kick is slightly out of tune. And this is something that can happen when you just pick a random sample from your library. And some of these 808 kicks especially, they have a little bit of a tuning curve, a tuning envelope inside. So sometimes just grabbing a sample from the library won't match the tune perfectly of your song. So what I'm gonna do now is listen very closely and hold down the shift button of Maschine and dial in the tuning very, very finely. And I'm gonna bring it up a little bit because I think it's a little flat still. Listen really closely. And I have the feeling that around 0.45 semitones, it matches the tone exactly. And in the same menu, you'll find a setting that allows you to switch from one shot, where it plays the sample from the beginning to the end, to an AHD setting, for example. So now we have a little bit of an envelope controlling how the kick drum is triggered. And the whole tail is now gone, so it's just these short impulses of bass instead. And with these knobs over here, I increase the length of the hold a little more. And that way, we create a little bit of space in between the kick drums for all the other elements of the track to shine a little bit through. Let's move on to the modulation envelope section. This is something which is really useful when working with synth samples, but in this case I'll be using it to shape the transients of the kick drum a little further. Transients are whenever a sound occurs in nature, there's the first couple of microseconds containing transient information. I call it also the clickiness of the sound. This is something that you could teach yourself listening to. Transients are very important because they shape the dynamic of a sound. And although the modulation envelope here in Maschine is not a transient plugin per se, I can use it to add a little bit of drive, for example, to only the first couple of moments of the kick drum. So not the whole kick drum is distorted, but only the very first little bit of it. So let's play that kick drum a couple of times and turn the drive a little bit up. So we hear a little bit of a distortion of the very first part of the sample, and then the distortion fades away and we have the clean ending. This is a very nice way of adding distortion to your sounds to make them a little more exciting. I like to roll with this one, and let's move further and bring in a real transient master here. It's part of the internal plugin collection of Maschine, and the transient master allows you to add more knockiness at the beginning of your sample and also to shape the sustain and the tail of the sample a little more. It's important to always keep your levels in check when you do things like this here, like distorting your transients or even shaping them further with a plugin like this. Because these small peak moments, they might not register in your ear, but if you take a look at the levels, they go really quickly into the red zone and they start clipping. So it's always good to keep an eye on your levels, maybe bring in a limiter. And as a matter of fact, the transient master has a limiter inside. So if you turn this on, you're on the safe side. You can basically increase the knock to infinity without ever driving into the red zone. So this is a really good thing. Let's move on and bring in an EQ, and that's the last bit here in my kick drum chain, because I find that kick drum a little bit boomy in the upper 100 to 120 hertz range. Also, I noticed that I don't have any other low frequency content in the instrumental. That tells me that I can actually raise the low end of the kick a little more. And let's do this. Let's bring it down, the low end here to 28 hertz. So doing this will increase the whole low end of the kick drum and make it more full. And and round. And as a second step, I will go in with a very sharp filter and soften the boomy frequency just a little bit. Let me do a quick A/B check here. I bypass the EQ without, and this is with. So it's a little heavier even. There's a little more going on in the low end. Love it! So let's move over to the snare drum. Snare crawler from Young Phantom. And now that snare has a little bit of a tone inside. It's not just a noise splash, but there is, if you listen closely, there is these high-pitched hic 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 inside that I can hear. But if I listen to the song, I find that it matches the tone right away. So I don't want to mess with the tuning here and go straight into a little bit of layering to make it more interesting. And the way I'm going to do this is hitting the sampler button and moving over to the zone menu here. This is where I can layer in more samples into the snare. So if I hit add, the browser is gonna open and I'm gonna dial in snare drums again, and this time adding the snare backyard alloys here. So we created another zone in the sampler, and if you take a look at the software, you can also see them represented here by these two entries, and currently they are mapped on top of one another, playing on all of these 127 notes. But we only need the root note for this example. So the backyard alloys sample adds a little bit of a different tone to the snare crawler, and I can change the volume of the zone and make it more pronounced, or have only the snare crawler. So yeah, I'll find a good balance between these two snare drums. And the backyard alloy snare drum, I feel that it could actually need a little bit of tuning. So let's try turning it one semitone up. Yeah, that's way better. Down, and one, up. Yes, they're perfectly in line. So you see, when shaping drums, it's really important to be in a good listening environment. Maybe use a pair of headphones to be able to listen to all of these pitches in the drum samples closely. Or when working with transients, it's good to have a good pair of speakers around which are fast enough to pick up all the transients and project it into the outside world so you're able to hear them. I think this snare combination is perfect and I want to roll with this, but for the last snare in the loop, I have a special idea in mind. Let's put some special sauce on it. It's reverb time. And in order to have a reverb splash on only one of the snares in the loop, I'm gonna be using a send and return effect. So let's stop it for a second and hit pad number 16. This is still empty, but if I go into the browser and select the effect section, I can choose from my internal effects, and I'm rolling with a reverb. And I load it into this pad. Now, as I'm using it as a send and return effect, it's very important to dial the dry wet values to a full 100%. So you will only gonna hear the tail of the reverb without any of the original source sound, really like the basically the wet reverb. Now I can do a couple of settings to the reverb itself. So for example, lengthen the reverb time, increase the room size, and cut off the high and the low frequencies to slim out the reverb tail so it doesn't mask all the other things going on in my example. In order to hear that reverb, we still gotta dial it in. So go back to the snare drum and hit the channel settings button. Here you can move over to a page which is called the aux page, where you get access for the auxiliary 1 and auxiliary 2 channels. I'll select the basic drum kit reverb here. It's listed here, F1, F16. And the knob next to it allows me to dial in the reverb on that snare. But instead of having it running all the time, I like to wait for the last snare before the turnaround of the loop happens, hold down auto, and then add a splash of snare. Check this out. Ooh. All the other snares, clean. If you take a look in the software, you see the reverb splash that I just recorded. Check this out again. Sweet! What's up with the hi-hats? Okay, let's take a look close at the hi-hats. And maybe solo the whole drum kit for that purpose. And again, first step, let's see if there's another tuning that makes you go, wow! And I do feel that the +4 semitone setting is just right to bring the frequency content of the hi-hat a little bit higher up and make some space for the snare drum in between. Sounds great, but a little bit too direct for my taste. When working with these fast hi-hat patterns that even incorporate faster articulations done with the note repeat, I'm a fan of a more lush sound instead of having a really direct, punchy hi-hat. Because the kick drum and the snare drum are already highlighted, so the hi-hats are more like a thing in the background, right? Let's dial it down a little bit, and one way of doing this is shifting it in the stereo spectrum. So the first thing I'm going to do, move over to the LFO section. And here it is possible to add some automatic panning in sync with the tempo of the LFO here. So let's do this. And go just a little bit of panning, and you should be able to hear, if you're listening on stereo headphones or speakers, you should hear that the hi-hats are moving really quickly to the left and the right hand side. It's like sprinkling here and there. Let's take it a step further and bring in phases, which is a phaser plugin. The frequency spectrum of that closed head is also going to modulate a little bit. I can already hear it. It's just something like this. Let's see if there's another preset that would work. Maybe go into the preset browser. This is very, very low. The vocal touch. Yeah, this is, I mean, it's probably meant to process vocals, but in that case, it does a really great job adding just that little bit of phasing on the hi-hat that makes it more lush. All right, There's a lot of things going on in the stereo field already, but I'm gonna take it up a notch. I'm duplicating the closed head sample to another pad with all the notes. So duplicate, make sure content and events is activated, hit it once and hit the other pad. So now we have two hi-hats playing the exact same thing at the exact same time. And what I'm actually trying to achieve is a super stereo spread hi-hat. Let's go into the mixer and change the panning. So the one hi-hat is more on the left side, the other one is more on the right side. Both of them are doing the LFO stereo thing, and both of them have a phases on top, so they start smearing in the frequency spectrum. So it's way more wavy than what we had before. And it's getting even more spread when I change one of the tunings of the hi-hat. Check this out, this is amazing, it's an amazing trick. So we have two hi-hats, the one is high, the one is low. Both are distributed in a stereo field, both are phasing. Peeps, I love it. I think this is something that I want to work with. And it's time to take a look at the drum bus. All the four sounds come together, including the reverb sound. They come together in the group channel. Let's add some effects here. Let's add a supercharger GT. And go quickly to the software, bring up the plugin here. And this is gonna help me to set up a thing called parallel compression. This means that the original signal is audible and a heavily compressed version of that signal is just mixed into this. So you can actually dial in the perfect balance between the compressed one and the original signal. And this way you are not over compressing your source material. It's a really great way of working with compressors, and Supercharger GT has it inside. There's this wet and dry knob that allows you to mix between the fully dry signal and the wet, fully compressed signal. So let's compress it heavily first on 100% wet. I'll be turning down the input trim. You see that there's this little red arrow which kind of indicates when something is going over the top. And here at -7, I found a sweet spot where I have some peaks on the left and the right hand side, but overall it's in the green zone. So let's turn on the saturation a little bit and compress it really hard. And of course the dynamics, they get flattened out now. This is something which is totally normal, and it shouldn't sound clean now. It should actually sound squashed. So let's bring the release down, have a really fast attack, bring the compressor up. Yeah, now it's really smacked already. Here's the dry signal. By dialing in just a little bit of wet, I'll bring in the whole foundation of the drum group without destroying these tasty transients that I have worked on before. Alright, that's just enough to make it solid. After Supercharger GT, I'm gonna plug in a maximizer. But I'm gonna be dialing it down to a more moderate 25%. Also the curve around 30%, so it's not as harsh, but it's still adding some hard edges to my drum bus. Here's without. And here with the maximizer, even a little more aggressive in the top end. Cool. Lastly, let's bring in a perform effect. I love that reverb splash at the very end, but what if we put a little tape stop on it? Whoop! And that was the last bit that I needed. I think the drum kit is pretty perfect. Let's listen to it in context. Sick. One last little thing is I want to have a little vinyl crackle on top of that drum beat. And in the HAZY Days Expansion, there is a sample called SFX Vinyl My Land, and I'm just gonna be copying this over to my drum kit here, paste it, and dial down the volume of the vinyl crackling just a little bit, so it's more a subtle detail in the background rather than a feature. Yeah, here it's perfect. All right, this was a real journey, so let's see where we started off from. That was our basic beat in the beginning. And this here is our perfectly designed, hard-knocking drum kit, including reverb splashes, turntable stops, maximizing, wavy closed heads. All we need to fit into this beat. Again, let's check out the basic beat that we started with. Yeah, all the 808s are not really there. Let's see. But let's mute these drums for a second and move over to the B section. The techniques and principles that you've just learned are in fact so universal that they are part of many drum instruments and samplers out there. One example is the new Kareem Riggins play instrument, which includes many different drums created and designed by Kareem himself. And I'm gonna use the pattern that I've created and have it played back by Kareem. But first, let's make some space and mute some elements. Also, the drum kit is gone, which means that we don't have a bass line anymore. Group H contains an additional bass line, more laid back, together with a melody I came up with using Playbox. These bell type of toy sounds. Very atmospheric. So let's bring in Kareem. He's also doing the triplets. And if you take a look at the settings of the Kareem Riggins play instrument, you see that some of these things that I told you about, the punch for example, the transients, this is something that you can dial in right away with this punch knob without adding or loading another plugin. There's also a sustain, similar to the transient master we've been using before. A little bit of saturation, which I also have been using quite a lot. That sounds sweet. And a couple of filters if you run into situations where you would like to filter a little bit of the low end. or the high end. This is also possible directly from the controller. Let's take a look at the software. It's this beautiful, colorful instrument design that I love to use here. And let's check out a couple of other kits. Whenever I find a kit that I really like, I just take a look at the knobs, see what's there, and change the transients right away here in the plugin itself. Also, if it's not matching the tune of your track, feel free to use this tune knob and shift it up or down to make those drums more heavy sounding. Hopefully, the techniques and principles I showed you today are inspiring you to make your drums knock harder in your next session. It's been a real pleasure to share some of my sound design secrets with you today. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and don't forget to hit the bell and subscribe to the NI channel. See you again soon.